Week 1 of the NFL season begins today, and I'm going to predict all 16 games going into this weekend. We'll talk a little bit about the Guardians and Major League Baseball towards the end of the show as well. Stick around, it's Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Welcome to today's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check me out on social media. Hoty Andrew on Twitter/X, Hoty Raw Takes on Instagram, and Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty on Facebook. Before we get into any of the predictions, I just want to say I am so excited to have football back. It is going to be a great season. Hopefully, the Browns are incredible this year with Deshaun Watson under center. I'm really excited to see what he can do, and the Browns offense and the Browns defense returning really fully loaded. They kind of get to run it back this year, which not many NFL teams get to do. But we'll talk about the Browns in just a little bit. We're just going to get right to it with my NFL predictions for all 16 games going into Week 1 and where all the teams will stand afterwards. So, let's get things going with today's game between the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think there's a lot of bad blood between these two teams. Personally, I want the Ravens to kind of win just because I'm kind of sick of the Chiefs being as good as they are. But also, I'm not really rooting for the Ravens because I'm a Browns fan, and the Ravens are obviously one of our rivals. So it's just kind of tough for me to say I want the Ravens to knock off the Chiefs, but at the same time, I'm not rooting for the Ravens to have a good season either. So for me, I'm looking at this game as primarily just a revenge factor. Revenge games in the NFL are always kind of fun, and I think the Baltimore Ravens are absolutely looking for some revenge against the Kansas City Chiefs. John Harbaugh knows Andy Reid very, very well. I expect the Baltimore Ravens to play one heck of a game tonight, and I think they're going to start off the season swinging. So my prediction is going to be Baltimore 35, Kansas City 34, and a high-scoring affair. The offenses kind of start to light things up. We see Mahomes and Kelsey have monster games. Kansas City's defense still pretty locked and loaded. So's Baltimore's, but I think today the offenses are really going to let it fly out. The NFL's back. I'm hoping we see a game that's kind of more like a shootout. I'm going to take the Ravens to win just based on a revenge factor for the AFC Championship game. We'll say 35-34. Over Kansas City and the Chiefs at home tonight at Arrowhead. So I think Baltimore is going to take the edge in that first game of the NFL season just because of a revenge factor primarily. Philadelphia and Green Bay is the next game on the slate, and that's going to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the first NFL game to be kicking off in Brazil. There was some headlines that the Browns were rumored to be one of the teams considered for the NFL game in Brazil, but that ended up not being the case. Green Bay will be taking on Philadelphia down in Sao Paulo. I am personally not really a super-duper fan of either one of these teams to really make a deep run this season, but I do think both of them have very, very good players. I like the Packers in this one. I think the Packers really are coming into their own. They're a really young roster. They have a pretty good offense and a very good offensive-minded coach in Matt LaFleur. Jordan Love really found himself in the postseason last year, and we've seen the succession in Green Bay take off, where they've only had 3 starting quarterbacks in Week 1 since 1993. That's 7 years before I was born. The Packers know what they're doing when it comes to quarterback succession. Jordan Love, I think, will be the guy for the future, but I do think Jalen Hurts is going to have a decent game as well. I still don't buy into Philadelphia's defense. They had a lot of issues to fix in the secondary. I'm not so sure I'm bought in yet, but of course there's a new defensive coaching staff, and I think there's a lot of people out there that are putting pressure on Nick Sirianni for no reason. He just took you to a Super Bowl 2 years ago. I mean, only 2 teams get to go to the Super Bowl every year. Unwarranted pressure on Nick Sirianni to somehow have a great year, but I don't think Philadelphia is going to open up the season rolling. I think they're going to take a little bit of time to kind of fall into their own, so I'm going to take the Packers in this one. Let's say 20-17 over Philadelphia down in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the first NFL game in Brazil. And it's going to be interesting to see the crowd that's in Sao Paulo because these international games, I think, in my opinion personally, it's becoming a little too much. I mean, as much as I think we should try to expand football as a sport internationally, I don't think just taking professional teams from America and playing them elsewhere is a great way to grow the brand. I think you need to start introducing the sport more so to the younger generations in other countries. Just bringing NFL teams there, I'm not so sure that's going to do it. And I don't think it's great for the American market either because this would be a Philadelphia home game in Philadelphia for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But that's another story we could talk about a different day. I don't like the whole every game's got to be international. When it was London and all that at first, I was like rolling my eyes saying fine. I think we need to really work on fixing that in the National Football League. Next game is Pittsburgh versus Atlanta. And this game will be in Atlanta. I personally think the Falcons are a little team that's under the radar right now. I think the addition of Kirk Cousins is going to be really good. They haven't really had a solid quarterback since Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan, obviously, in his later years wasn't so great. And you look at the Falcons' defense, it's vastly improved than it has been over the last couple of seasons. I think if you look at their offense, and especially a player like Kyle Pitts or a player like Bijan Robinson, this is a loaded roster to say the least. Pittsburgh, my biggest question is still the quarterback position. Russell Wilson getting the start. I think the Steelers start off a little bit rocky, and once Justin Fields takes over, I think the Steelers kind of come into their own a little bit. So I'm taking Atlanta to win this game 24-20 at home. I just think the Falcons are really, really deep roster construction-wise. I think they have a lot of untapped potential that's going to start to show. And I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers are really still trying to learn about themselves. All right, Buffalo, Arizona. I'm actually taking an upset here. I think a lot of people would pick Buffalo. But the reason I like Arizona is just because we haven't seen much of Marvin Harrison Jr. yet. Kyler Murray, I think, is a lot better than given credit for, but I don't think he's great by any stretch of the imagination. I think their offense is going to be vastly improved with a massive addition at wide receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think the Cardinals shocked the world and upset the Bills this weekend, 27-17, and that game is in Buffalo. Hostile environment, obviously, for Arizona to go to Orchard Park and try to win a game, so that may be a factor, but I think a lot of people are not really talking about the Cardinals much because of that. I mean, they kept Kyler Murray, and I know a lot of people aren't high on Kyler Murray. Like I said, totally get it. But I think adding Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be big because Kyler Murray just has to get the ball to him. And if he can, I think the Arizona Cardinals could be a lot better than given credit for. So I'm going to take the Cardinals to just kind of shock the world a little bit and upset Buffalo 27-17. I'm not picking them as a playoff team. I do have the Bills as a playoff team in my mind, but to me, Arizona is a team to kind of keep an eye on just to see if they surprise you this year. I wouldn't be stunned if they have an 8-9, 9-8-ish season. That's probably pushing it a little bit. But to me, Arizona's got some really good players, and they're very, very young, and they're building on trying to do something. Jonathan Gannon, I think, also has a lot of potential as a head coach with the Arizona Cardinals. We'll have to see. But I'm going to take the Cardinals over Buffalo in a surprising upset, 27-17. All right, this game may be considered a little bit of an upset, but I don't personally think it is. I'm taking Tennessee over Chicago 23-7. I would not be surprised if the Bears win this game. I just think Caleb Williams is going to be a disaster this year, and I think he's going to start off very slow. I think the Bears get off to an awful start, and I think the coaching staff is clearly on the hot seat, along with the front office. The Bears, to me, are literally in the midst of possibly having a disaster season, and I think the overwhelming media hype surrounding the Bears and Caleb Williams being the next superstar quarterback in the NFL is absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing to me that screams superstar about Caleb Williams, and certainly even if he is one, because I may be wrong, he may turn out to be a very good quarterback, and I hope he is. I'm not rooting against him. But if he does end up being a very good quarterback, I don't think it deserves to be credit to the coaching staff and the staff that's with the Bears right now. The Bears, to me, just don't feel like they know what they're doing, and still don't think they know what they're doing because I don't like that they moved off of Justin Fields. But we could talk about that another day. In regards to this Week 1 game, Tennessee has a lot of experienced players compared to Chicago. They're not a very good football team. They have a rookie head coach coming out there, but I don't think Matt Eberflus is a great head coach either, so I don't think that's really going to matter much. Obviously, Brian Callahan's debut as an NFL coach. Bill Callahan, former Browns coach, of course, he's now coaching that offensive line. I think Tennessee is going to be blocking very well for Will Levis. Will Levis, I think, does have some potential. I don't think he's going to be great, but there is something, I think, in there for him to at least be okay. So I like Tennessee in this game to kind of shock the world and upset the Chicago Bears. I don't know if that would necessarily be considered an upset. I don't consider it an upset. I think Tennessee is just a much better put-together team right now compared to Chicago, and that's primarily because I think they have a lot more experience than the Bears, and I think they're not as hyped as the Bears. The media attention's not really on them. Chicago, it is. The Bears got to perform or people are going to lose jobs, players going to get cut. 23-7, I think Tennessee takes this game, kind of calms the temperatures in Chicago a little bit for the Bears, not only for their roster, but for the organization as well. All right, the Patriots at the Bengals. I think this is going to be an absolute beatdown. I got Cincinnati 20-3. Joe Burrow is going to come back, I think, better than ever. I have the Bengals winning the AFC North. They've been to a Super Bowl before in the last 5 seasons, so obviously I think they could get there again. Will they? I still question that. We'll have to see as the season plays out. I haven't made any official playoff predictions. I have my playoff teams, but I don't make playoff predictions in terms of if they can get to the Super Bowl until I see what the playoff field is. So I'm not going to go that far. I think Cincinnati has potential to get there again. But I think they're absolutely going to demolish the New England Patriots, and I think it's important Cincinnati does that. Cincinnati is not known for opening the season very well in recent years. They got destroyed by the Browns defense last season to open the year. Joe Burrow was essentially just running in and out of the pocket the entire game. It was a mess for Cincinnati, and the Browns really took care of business. And the year before that, the game against Pittsburgh, Joe Burrow was kind of a shell of himself too. They lost that game, I think, 23-20 in overtime. But they shouldn't have lost that game because Pittsburgh really wasn't that good that day either. But they did. So they're not known for opening the season well, but with an opponent like New England, I don't think that's going to be a problem. New England on paper looks awful. Just awful. They have a quarterback who is a veteran that they're going to start tomorrow in Jacoby Brissett. We know him well here in Cleveland. I have New England getting demolished by Cincinnati, 20-3. I think Joe Burrow and the Bengals get off on the right foot as they start to roll a little bit this season. All right, Indianapolis, Houston. I'm actually pretty fascinated by this game because Anthony Richardson's making his return. C.J. Stroud, of course, going into year 2. I expect high things of him. I think he will have a good season. But like I mentioned before, I think the Houston Texans do take a little bit of a step back. Gonna have a little bit of a humbling year, in my opinion. And I think it starts this week. I'm taking Indianapolis 24-14 in Houston. The reason I'm taking Indianapolis to win this game is just because we haven't seen too much from Anthony Richardson yet and what he can do. I think he can be very good. Will he be very good is still yet to be seen. But I really like the coaching staff that Indianapolis has put together with Shane Steichen at the helm. I think he's going to have those guys ready and willing to go. They still lack some wide receiver depth. So I'm not going to say that the Indianapolis Colts are going to have the fanciest plays of Anthony Richardson throwing the football because the receiver depth isn't great. But they also have Jonathan Taylor running the football, and he can run circles, in my opinion, around that Houston Texans defense. Even though Anderson's a very good pass rusher, I don't see the Houston Texans defense really making a huge stride in this particular game. So I really like Indianapolis to kind of go to Houston and win this game because I think Indianapolis is trying to kind of prove themselves, and they're upset about what happened at the end of the season last year where the Houston Texans ended up making the playoffs and winning the division with a big win at Lucas Oil Stadium at the end of the season. So we'll have to see what takes place between these two teams. But for me, I'm going to take Indianapolis to defeat Houston 24-14 and what I believe is an upset. All right, we got a Florida battle between Miami and Jacksonville in Miami at Hard Rock Stadium. These two teams, I think, on paper can be very good. I trust Jacksonville's quarterback a lot more than I trust Miami's, but I trust Miami's offensive personnel a lot more. I really like the weapons Miami has, probably the best personnel of wide receivers in the entire league when you look at Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle alone. So for me, I'm going to take Miami 23-20. I think some QB mistakes may cost the Dolphins a little bit more of a blowout. Jacksonville, I think, is in the game the whole time, but I think the Jaguars kind of start off slow. I'm still picking them to win the AFC South. But I think Miami is just the better team, and I think they're a little bit better coached right now. I think Doug Peterson still has a lot of pencils to fill in the blanks. So for me, I am going to take Miami over Jacksonville 23-20 in Miami with home field advantage. I really like what the Dolphins, I think, can do. All right, divisional matchup, New Orleans and Carolina. I don't think nationally a lot of people are going to be paying attention to this game, but I do think the New Orleans Saints could be a little bit of an under-the-radar team. Dennis Allen is on the hot seat in New Orleans. I do think if the Saints don't start rolling this season, then Dennis Allen is going to lose his job as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. So it's a very big season for the Saints to be really, really good. Carolina, on the other hand, I think they are an absolute mess right now. Dave Canales' debut as the head coach of Carolina. I think Bryce Young will step up a little bit because he has a head coach that's worked with undersized quarterbacks before, just like he did with Baker Mayfield as the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay. But with that being said, the Carolina's organizationally they're just a disaster. So I'm not going to put this on the team. I'm taking the Saints, of course, to win 17-3 over Carolina. I'm not putting it on the Carolina Panthers coaching staff or the players if they lose this game. I'm putting it on the organization. They're a terrible organization, and I think they're heading for another disastrous season. I think the New Orleans Saints have a lot more on the line than Carolina does right now, and they need to show it. So I'm taking the Saints, and that game's going to be in New Orleans, 17-3. All right, the New York Giants and the Minnesota Vikings. This is going to be an interesting one. I am picking the Giants to blow out the Vikings 33-13. I think the Giants are going to be a lot better than people may think they are. I think Daniel Jones is going to be a pretty decent quarterback this year. I think Brian Daboll is an exceptional NFL head coach, and I think he's going to show that again this year. Obviously, there were some mishaps last year, so Brian Daboll's possibly coaching for his job as well. Minnesota on paper is just a mess. There's just nothing about the Vikings I like outside of Justin Jefferson. Defensively, absolutely nothing there that really shines out to me. Kevin O'Connell, I think, has a lot of potential as a head coach. I think Brian Flores is going to be a good defensive coordinator, but I don't think it's Brian Flores' fault that this Minnesota roster is really lacking talent. And with no J.J. McCarthy this season, he's essentially going to be a rookie next year. So I really look at the Vikings as rebuilding this year, and I think they start to show it in their Week 1 game. I'm taking the Giants to blow out the Vikings 33-13. All right, this one's going to be interesting. The Chargers hosting the Raiders. It's the head coaching debuts, technically not for Antonio Pierce, because Antonio Pierce was the interim last year, but Jim Harbaugh head coaching debut for the Chargers. Of course, he's been to a Super Bowl before, though, when he was the 49ers head coach back in the day. So he has some head coaching experience in the NFL, which I think is going to be huge for Justin Herbert. I don't think a lot of people are high on the Chargers this year. I am, and it's solely because I think Justin Herbert's just that good. I think he can make a lot of things happen just because he's Justin Herbert. And I think that Jim Harbaugh can untap that potential a little bit. I think he's a very good NFL head coach. He's been to a Super Bowl before. I think being a Harbaugh, he's going to know what Andy Reid schemes up when they get to division games later this year against Kansas City. So I'd honestly be stunned if the Chargers don't find a way to upset Kansas City in one of their 2 meetings, but we'll talk about that later on this season when they play. The Chargers I like as a team and as a unit. I think they made some pretty good draft picks as well, especially Joe Alt. This roster is going to be really, really underrated, in my opinion. And I like to see what the Chargers do throughout the season with Jim Harbaugh at the helm. With that said, I also like the culture the Raiders are building to a degree. Now, the roster I don't think adds up all the way. They do have Max Crosby, who's really good. Gardner Minshew is probably the new Ryan Fitzpatrick in terms of he's going to be probably the best journeyman quarterback in the NFL for years to come. But with Gardner Minshew, you probably don't set the ceiling that high. But, I mean, the Indianapolis Colts almost had a playoff berth last year. So I think the Raiders could be a lot better than given credit for. With that said, they're still the Raiders, and they're still in a very, very weird position. And I do like the hiring of Antonio Pierce. To me, I think that's kind of like a Dan Campbell hire. He's a former NFL player who understands the culture and fun of the locker room. He's going to be able to resonate with a lot of those Raiders players in the locker room because he's been there and done it before, and he's a Super Bowl champion with the New York Giants. So Antonio Pierce knows what it takes to win, and I'm actually excited to see what he brings to the Las Vegas Raiders. With that said, though, I am going to take the Chargers to win this game, 21-14. They're at home. Jim Harbaugh makes his debut, and I think just based on quarterback matchup alone, the Chargers should be favored to win this game. So I'll take the LA Chargers over the Raiders, 21-14. Seattle hosting the Denver Broncos. This time, not a Russell Wilson revenge matchup. Russell Wilson's not even in the building for this game. Seattle is going through a head coaching change now that Pete Carroll's not there anymore. I don't know if Geno Smith is going to be the same kind of quarterback he once was when Pete Carroll was there. So I have some question marks about Seattle based on that alone. But yeah, DK Metcalf is a wide receiver. That's going to help you out a ton. Denver, in my opinion, is kind of a shell of themselves right now, but Sean Payton's in the building. He can bring some stability. I think Bo Nix has potential, but Bo Nix still has a long way to go, and it's his first NFL start outside of the preseason. And he did have a very good preseason. So I think he will bring a lot to the Denver Broncos from the quarterback position, but this roster is still not very good. So I cannot say that I really like the Denver Broncos or even the Seattle Seahawks. I don't really buy into either one of these teams, but because of players like Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, I'm going to take Seattle to win this game 17-14, but I would not be stunned if Denver wins this game either. To me, this isn't really one of the premier matchups of the weekend. I'm not really looking forward to seeing this game, but I'm looking forward to see the results of what takes place for both of these teams as the season goes on. Seattle over Denver, 17-14, kind of put that in that Carolina-New Orleans mix of games that I don't think we're all going to be paying attention to closely. However, interesting things could develop as the season goes on. All right, Tampa Bay hosting Washington. Daniels making his debut at quarterback for the Commanders. Dan Quinn making his head coaching debut for the Commanders after he was with the Atlanta Falcons. I'm not so sure Dan Quinn was really the best hire for the Commanders' job, but with what he was able to do with the Dallas Cowboys, I do think he absolutely deserved a chance to do it. But to me, the Commanders still have a long way to go. I like Tampa in this game 2016 based on roster alone and based on the head coaching experience from Todd Bowles. And I'm rooting for Baker Mayfield. I mean, as I said before, as much as I think it was the right decision for the Browns to trade for Deshaun Watson and move on from Baker Mayfield's blue-collar attitude and his time in Cleveland is still hard to root against, and he got a playoff win last year. So I'm rooting for Baker Mayfield to have a good season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think the Buccaneers are an exceptional organization, and they've shown it over the last couple of seasons. I think there's people in that building that clearly know what they're doing. I think Todd Bowles proved himself as a head coach last year. I think you have weapons like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Really good roster still from top to bottom. Tampa Bay's offense can be really good with Baker Mayfield under center. And kind of like that Kyler Murray situation, just get the ball to some of those playmakers. You really don't have to worry about how bad quarterback play could be at times. Baker Mayfield's streaky, but he had a good season last year. I like Tampa Bay in this game over the Washington Commanders. But I think the Commanders have a lot of positive upside from this game. I have it going close. 20-16, Tampa Bay over Washington. All right, my hometown Browns taking on the Dallas Cowboys in what is Tom Brady's first Fox game of the season and his first time in the broadcasting booth as a color analyst. I am really excited to see what Tom Brady brings to the broadcast because he's so articulate, and I think he, being the all-time great quarterback that he is, can bring so much commentary. So I could talk about how excited I am for Tom Brady being in sports broadcasting all day long. It's going to be really interesting to see what he talks about during this game. But to the Browns and the Cowboys for a second. The Browns are at home. Their defense is stacked. Their offense, we do have question marks, but the question marks are really around Deshaun Watson. And how good is he going to be? If he's just 70% of what he was in Houston, that's pretty good. That's all we really need to ask of him as Browns fans. So I think that the Browns are going to be in good hands with that going into this game. What I don't like about Dallas is they do have some nice weapons like CeeDee Lamb, and they also have Micah Parsons on the other side. But the good news is we have the corners to help cover CeeDee Lamb. We have the corners, the safeties, I think can help cover CeeDee Lamb. So I'm not too worried that he's going to be making great plays all game long. And also Micah Parsons is going to have to face that really good Browns offensive line. So I personally am not that concerned in terms of this game being really high scoring. I think it's going to be very close and down to the wire. Question marks about Dak Prescott, I think, are a little bit ridiculous because I think Dak Prescott's a guy who's shown he is who he is. He's not great, but he is absolutely far from being a bad quarterback. He is definitely above average at best. Dak Prescott can get the job done. So the Cowboys, with all the hype they bring and the expectations that they always have, Dallas Cowboy fans, of course, are going to be very expectant for this team to win this game. Even if they lose to the Browns, I don't think the Cowboys have the season falling down on them right away. They showed when they lost to Tampa a few years ago that the season didn't get under their way, and they still went 13-4 that year. And that was when Tom Brady was still quarterback in the Bucs. And then guess what happened? They would go on in that same season to beat Tom Brady in the playoffs. And that was back in 2022. So opening games tend to not necessarily be a good projection for the Cowboys. With that said, I'm taking the Browns to win this game 20-17. The main reason I'm taking the Browns to win this game is because of how good the defense is. I think the defense will absolutely be able to shut down whatever the Cowboys do offensively. And I think they'll do it enough where the Browns just have to have somewhat a good offensive production in order to win this game. So I have it close. And I don't have it being a shootout. I don't have it being a ridiculously low-scoring game. I have it at 20-17, which is the most common score in the NFL. 20-17, the Browns win on a game-ending field goal. I think we see the Browns offense do enough to win the game, and I think we see the defense completely stack down on the Cowboys, and the Cowboys may score those touchdowns on special teams, or they may even score them just based on the fact the defense gets a little gassed late in the game. I think the defense is still going to shut them down pretty good to where they only limit them to 2 touchdowns and a field goal. I mean, if you're an NFL defense, it's pretty good. You can hold the Cowboys to 17 points. That's fine. But obviously, if they could hold them down to even less, that'd be great. But to me, this is a middle-of-the-pack matchup because I think these two teams are kind of in the middle of the pack. There's a lot of question marks for both. That's the best way to say it. We have a lot of question marks about Dallas, and we have a lot of question marks about Cleveland. And until those question marks are answered, we're going to see later on in the season. So why not pick this game to be close? 20-17, the Browns over the Cowboys. That home field advantage, that dog pound gets wild and helps lift the Browns to victory. Another rematch between Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff. I kind of think this should be a bigger rivalry than it is. But I think the playoff game might have helped that out a little bit. I think maybe in Detroit they're definitely feeling that right now. But, I mean, that's an organization that's only won 3 playoff games since 1957. And I can't believe I'm saying 3 because it used to be 1 playoff win since 1957. But now it's 3 playoff wins since 1957. And they haven't won a road playoff game in an even longer time since that. So, but it's good for the Detroit Lions. They're building something special with Dan Campbell. And I like them in this game. I think it's going to be very close. I think the Rams are a Super Bowl contender yet again. I was very adamant last year on the Rams bouncing back after they had a disastrous 2022, but they won the Super Bowl the year before, so they could have had a disastrous season. It wouldn't matter. They already won the Super Bowl. And they bounced back last year with Matthew Stafford. I think they're going to bounce back even bigger this year, so I like the Rams in this situation. With that said, though, I still think Detroit's got a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. I think Jared Goff has a chip on his shoulder, and I think he is going to show the Los Angeles Rams maybe once again why they made a mistake to keep Matthew Stafford long term. Even though that's obviously wrong because Matthew Stafford won them a Super Bowl, Jared Goff still has that edge against the Rams because he got to a Super Bowl with the Rams. Just didn't win it. So that chip is still on Jared Goff's shoulder. You look at the offense that Detroit has, and you look at the receivers they have, and you look at the running backs, you look at the offensive line, like Penei Sewell is just a monster. Really good offensive lineman, and even the defense coming to forms led by Aiden Hutchinson pass rushing. I really like the Detroit Lions roster construction. I really like that Ben Johnson's staying there another year. That's going to really help the offense. And I'm going to take Detroit 27-24 to defeat the Rams. Very close game. Sean McVay draws some X's and O's really well, but I think it comes down to a field goal or maybe a touchdown for whoever wins this game, and I'm going to take Detroit. I believe Detroit's going to sustain this success long term. I really do think they're building themselves into being a very good NFL organization. All right, I'm actually excited about this game. The Jets and the 49ers. I'm always kind of excited to see Aaron Rodgers take on the 49ers because Aaron Rodgers wasn't drafted by the 49ers, and he said that he was going to make sure the 49ers regret not drafting him, so I kind of feel like there's a little bit of a rivalry between him and the 49ers. Obviously, you can look at it both ways. Rodgers has won a Super Bowl, and the 49ers have pretty much beaten Rodgers in the playoffs in every single meeting. So honestly, it looks like it can go both ways for that argument on if passing on Rodgers was the right decision or not. With that being said, the Jets' defense is absolutely shut down. Sauce Gardner, one of the best corners in the league. It doesn't even need to be the Jets' offense that wins this game. I think the Jets' defense is that good. But because Aaron Rodgers is there, that's going to help significantly. I have the Jets beating the 49ers 20-14 this Monday. hoping they can get off to a good start because I really like Robert Saleh. I think he brings a lot of good culture to the Jets. I watched him on Hard Knocks last year. I think he brings a lot of good stuff to the table. So part of me is really rooting for the Jets to have a really good season because I do think they have some great talent on that roster. So much untapped potential. The Jets have just been such a mess and a curse for a long time that it's just about time that they start to rattle off some wins here. So I'm going to take the New York Jets over San Francisco 20-14. And so those are my picks on all 16 NFL games going into Week 1. Do you agree with my picks? Do you disagree with my picks? Let me know. Reach out to me on social media, and you know where to do so. Twitter X, Hoty Andrew. Instagram, Hoty Raw Takes, and Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty on Facebook. Or you could leave a comment in the comment section below, and let me know what you think of my picks for Week 1. Let's talk a little bit about baseball before we wrap up the show. The Guardians losing to the Kansas City Royals yesterday, and I am not being bought into Ben Lively anymore. He is definitely looking like a shell of himself as a pitcher. He's just been a disaster. He's only going about 3 innings now. He'll unravel and let off a bunch of earned runs. Ben Lively is becoming a liability for the rotation, and I think the Guardians need to be a little bit concerned about that. But with that being said, you have Alex Cobb, you have Matthew Boyd. Maybe Ben Lively just becomes the game you use your bullpen more in. Tanner Bybee, I think, could hold it pretty together for the most part in games. He does have some hiccups here and there, but I could see him going 6-7 innings a game. You look at Gavin Williams, he went 7 innings the other night. He did a terrific job in the first Kansas City game. So, to me, the Guardians just really have one issue in the rotation left, and that's Ben Lively, and he's really been hiccuping late this season. But can he get it back together? He possibly could. I don't know if he can, though, and that's becoming a liability. Guardians this weekend taking on the Los Angeles Dodgers, a tough opponent. But then they have the Chicago White Sox, and if you saw what took place between Grady Sizemore and the umpire the other day, that may just sum up the entire season for the White Sox. But then they went out and they smacked Baltimore the day after. So the Chicago White Sox, for some odd reason, continue to play good teams really, really tough. But being a 105-plus loss team, it's honestly laughable. Just how bad they are. And I'll continue to say it. We said the Oakland A's of last year were going to be the worst team in baseball, but this Chicago White Sox team gives that team a run for their money. The Oakland A's look like World Series contenders compared to the Chicago White Sox. So with that being said, I think it's very adamant for the Guardians to continue to build upon this offense. Stephen Kwan's still in a pretty big slump. But you look at Lane Thomas, he's been coming to form. You look at Brian Rocchio, he's getting the job done a little bit more. I think he gets so much unwarranted hate at this point here in Cleveland. Brian Rocchio is getting the job done since August. He's had some clutch hits. He's batted in some big-time runs. He's hit some home runs. The guy's got potential. I'm not saying he's the shortstop of the future, but I don't think he deserves that. All this talk about his bat's not very good and he can't be the guy that replaces all the talk of that. He can't be the guy that becomes the next shortstop. I think it's ridiculous. Let's just give him a little bit more time. But the Guardians as a whole, they're still in first place, and I think it's going to be really hard for Kansas City at this point to catch them. I honestly think it's going to be really, really hard for Minnesota to catch the Guardians, but they still have one more series. So the Guardians and Minnesota have to take on each other one more time. That's going to be important when that series comes up. But the Guardians still need to just keep rattling off some wins here, and it's not going to be an easy task when they go to LA to take on the Dodgers this weekend, nor is it going to be an easy task because for some reason when they go to Chicago next week, those White Sox, those darn White Sox, give them some fits. And Grady Sizemore is now the manager, so is there going to be like a revenge aspect to that series, maybe, after Sizemore left in 2011? Probably not, but we'll have to see what takes place between the White Sox and Guardians next week. Other than that, though, I'm pretty confident the Guardians are going to be just fine. And as for college football, not too many games piquing my interest going into this weekend, especially because Ohio State kind of has a couple bye weeks to open the year. Pun intended, because they're just playing some pretty below-average teams compared to them. But the Michigan and Texas game this weekend is going to be huge because we think Texas should be one of the best teams in college football. And Michigan ranked, I think, a lot lower than they should be because they lost a lot of talent. But Michigan, I still think, will be prime competing with Texas in this game. I think it's going to come down to the wire. That's the game I'd keep my eye out for this weekend as college football really gets into full swing. But as the season goes on, we're going to have some more high-key matchups and it'll be interesting to see what takes place. I still think Michigan is going to be very, very good by the time they get to Ohio State, and it's going to be all on Ohio State, where the pressure is, as always, to win that game. But also the expanded playoff format and all this other stuff going on in college football, it's all going to start to reveal itself as the season goes on, and I'm excited to see what takes place. That's going to be it for today's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Like I said, like and subscribe, comment below, and let me know your thoughts on my Week 1 predictions, or maybe you have some thoughts on the Guardians or college football. Whatever you want to talk about, leave it in the comments below, and I'll check those out. You can also reach out to me on social media directly. Check me out on Twitter/X, Hoty Andrew. You can follow me on Instagram at Hoty Raw Takes and Facebook Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. You know who I am. I'm Andrew Hoty, and these are my Raw Takes. Have a good one, everybody. I'll be back next week with some more Raw Takes, reacting to Week 1 and preparing for Week 2 of the NFL season. Have a good weekend, everybody.